Welcome to Malpractice Podcast.
Are you ready to get started?
I'm super ready. I don't know why.
Did you hear how peppy that was?
Yeah, we're peps. Peps for
I sounded
sure.
like a cheerleader.
Oh, you clapped. Oh, my God.
Assaulting the ears.
Attacking me. Hello.
Listen, the thing about it is it feels like it's been 1,000 years since we've done this, but also the blink of an eye.
Also 3 seconds.
Because how is this year almost gone?
Dude, the year of our Lord COVID, round 2.
The year of our Lord and Savior. Make that make sense. How is it fall?
Yeah, I was like very shocked at the good weather we were having. I was like...
Speaking of weather, some of you may know I live in Houston, and we are in the middle of...
the depths of despair.
Correct. It's hurricane season, number one. And if you live in a place that doesn't get hurricanes, they're wild.
They're crazy.
AF. Because it's like, it could be literally anything. People are like, is it going to be windy? Maybe. Is it going to rain? Probably.
Is it going to be randomly sunny and beautiful,
Correct.
but also eerily scary?
Might be.
Yes, probably.
Is it going to tear the roof off my house? Who knows? No one knows.
For sure.
It's like the scariest thing in the world because, well, I mean, it's fine, whatever. Earthquakes are the scariest thing in the world. But this is like...
Dude, but it is scary.
So scary. We're probably fine. We're like waiting right now. Tomorrow's supposed to be the really bad day. So when this episode comes out, it will have already happened.
You will have already endured the bad day.
Maybe I died, maybe I didn't. Who knows?
We'll find out next Wednesday.
Find out next week on Malpractice. Oh, yeah. This is Malpractice. It's our show.
We said Malpals.
We said it, yeah.
So
I'm
I
Sydney.
think it's fine. And I'm Jess. And we
we're
talk about
your
the weather.
hosts. This is a podcast about the weather in a very specific part of Texas, which you probably don't care about.
And our opinions about hurricanes.
Correct.
That's this episode.
We're here to talk about weather phenomenon, potentially global warming. We can talk about that.
Oh, we could definitely talk about that.
Because it's making the hurricanes, like, crazy. Like, every year now, they're like, you're going to die this year. And we're like, okay, well, if you live on the coast, the oceans are rising, and you should be nervous. I'm nervous.
Yeah, I'm nervous. That's actually one of the reasons we left Houston.
Yeah.
Was because of the weather. It's so trash. Of course, you're fucking Houston for life.
Yeah, I'm a ride or die Houstonian. I'm not gonna lie.
You are.
I'm such a homer. I love it here. Every time people come, I'm like a tour guide. I'm like, here are the 10 best museums in Houston. And everyone's like, okay, calm down.
At least that's nice.
There's hurricanes.
Okay, so we've had a break. It's been short, but we back. We ready. We were like breathing during the break, and we were reflecting on a couple of things. Like, it's almost been a year since we started our podcast, which...
Can you believe that?
WTF.
Make that make sense to me, that it's been a year. Almost a year. We're not at 1 year yet.
Well, I'm sure we're at the point that we originally started thinking about podcasting.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So we're at the idea anniversary of our podcast.
Yeah.
We've covered really cool topics.
Agreed.
We've interviewed amazing people. Today's episode is no exception. Spoiler alert.
100%.
And we just like really have enjoyed what we're doing, to be honest.
Yeah. We hope you guys enjoy it too.
So I wanted to ask you some questions, little angel.
Do it.
What has been your favorite episode so far? Because we did talk about this post season 1, and I wonder if your favorite episode has changed.
I have to think about this. Okay, my favorite one that I did, I think, was the Nexium Wellness Cult.
Oh, yeah. That was
because that one is so weird.
That was a bop.
And it's so random, and you know it has true crime, and I love true crime.
Yeah, you do.
My favorite episode that you did, I think, has to be DuPont.
Yeah, because it also has true crime.
Yep.
That sounds about right.
You know what I like. I also really liked your Starvation Heights episode.
That is still a bop from way back when.
If you haven't listened to that one,
some weird
go
shit.
back to the very beginning. Starvation Heights is
terrifying.
One of the most
Yes.
truly fucked up things that I have ever heard to this day. What are your favorites?
I was just doing my own little scrollington.
We can't say who our favorite guests are because every
because
single guest we have,
all of them.
all of them. I love every guest we've interviewed. They're all my favorite. I want to adopt them all as my children.
I want to adopt Dr. Nate Link.
He said
CMO. He said
Jessica
we could adopt
said,
him.
I don't know if you guys remember this. At the very end of that episode.
It's the weirdest thing I have ever said in my life, but I stand by
We were talking about Dr. Link and we were like, wow, we love him. Loved that episode. Loved interviewing him. And Jess goes, I want to adopt him.
Oh, why did I say that? That
and he
goes
sent
for
us
half the things I say.
Correct.
Why did I say
Why? Make it make sense. And he sent us an email and he was like, hey, love doing the podcast. Thank you guys so much for having me. And by the way, I would love for either of you to adopt me.
And I was like, oh my God, it's the light of day and you're a creep, Jessica Oswald.
Jessica Oswald, yeah.
Stop it right now.
But that man has the most calming energy.
Oh my God. No, he is the best person.
He's the person, if you haven't listened to that interview, he's
That's
the person you want at the helm of your hospital when it's going through crisis. Yes, absolutely.
Any crisis. What is going on in the world? The hurricane, bring him down.
Call him in.
He'll solve all the problems.
Absolutely.
So my favorite one that you've ever done, or you did in season 2, is Radium Girls.
Oh, I loved that one.
That was because then I watched the movie.
Yes, same.
And it was also good.
Yeah.
But the episode is better. No offense to the movie.
Thank you.
And my favorite one that I did was DuPont because I was shook AF.
The DuPont one shook me to my core.
Shook.
Yeah.
To my core. I threw out pans.
Yeah.
We don't have pans anymore.
I still am like renovating my whole life to get rid of DuPont chemicals. Like, get them out. Get them out of here.
Bye-bye. Get them out. Never heard of them. Hate them. What is something we talked about? Well, I mean, we kind of already talked about this. So it was like your WTH moment that you were like, wait, really? Like, what was that episode for you? I can go first if you want.
DuPont.
It was
DuPont. It was DuPont for me. Or, let me think.
I have to look if we're talking season 1, it was that one, I'm like, you did it. And I was like, what? It was like on jeans or something.
Oh, CRISPR?
Yes, that was the one. I still have nightmares.
Yeah, CRISPR is crazy.
Probably MK Ultra was another one for me that I was like,
MK Ultra was a very weird one. Like when I was doing the research for MK Ultra, I was like, okay, first of all, there's no way this is real.
It's super real.
But then there were like certified CIA documents that were like in court with, whatever, what do you call it? Classified. The like classified bits like blacked out. And I was like, this is real.
Mm-hmm.
Like people won settlements with the CIA. Like there are documented court cases. Like it's real. I couldn't believe it.
Very strange.
I thought it was a conspiracy theory. I'm going to be honest. I feel like if somebody wins a documented court case and you could read like court transcripts, then you basically know it's real.
Yeah. 17,000 people.
Right. And DuPont, like everybody sued DuPont.
Yeah.
That was my what the hell moment.
I fucking filed a suit because who knows?
Yeah. Throw it on there. The judge is like, I'll hear it. Why not?
Yeah, why not? So what are you excited about for the future of the pod? So do you have any big plans for this next season?
Yes. I have a running list of episodes that I always keep. We do the same thing.
Yeah.
I have a few like viewer requests.
Don't feel like you need to spoil.
Okay.
Don't need to spoil.
I have a few episodes,
but the viewer request is cool.
Yeah, I have a few episodes based on listener requests. One of them is a professor that I'm very, very excited about. She does some really cool that you know her. Do I spoil it?
No, don't spoil.
Okay, I won't spoil it. But we've got some big things in the works for season 3 that we're super excited about. I'm so jazzed about it. What about you?
So I was talking about the at this work meeting I was at about our food allergy episodes because my coworker Eric like listens to the pod, and he was like, I did hear those. Like, those are really good. And my boss, his son has like severe food allergies, like severe allergies. And he was like, you should talk to my wife. Like, I'm sure she'd want to be interviewed. And like, she had to become the expert for everything for him. Like, she did her own research. Basically, we've already kind of covered that, how you have to become. But I think that moment where people are like, hey, like, you should talk to so-and-so to be on your pod. I'm like, that's cool. Like, that makes me excited.
I love that.
And I have like plans. I have my running list too, but I think what's cool is like when people are like, hey, you should talk to so-and-so.
Yeah, me too.
Like the connecting moments. That's like kind of cool.
I also love, this is going to sound like a humble brag, and maybe it kind of is, but a lot of the guests that we've had, like Emily Nolan, Nate Link, a lot of those people reached out to us to ask us about being on the show. And it is like, it just gave me chills. Like, it's such an honor.
We're not worthy.
I still feel like we're like running things out of our garage, which we're both in our closets right now, so we kind of are.
Right now.
But people reaching out to us and being like, hey, I love your show. I'd love to be a guest as an expert. Yeah. I'm like, wow, it feels like such an honor and such a privilege. And also to like get their stories out feels like such a good use of our platform.
Yeah. That's why we wanted to do it too. So I think that's really cool. I think it's cool when listeners are like, can you cover this? Like, I have questions about this.
I love that.
Like, you do a good job of engaging, like, what do you want to hear, this or that, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like the follow-on, it created our first 2-parter. Like, all of those moments are just really, really cool.
I totally agree. And I'm excited to be back recording. I know we've done a few interviews and stuff like that, and we did the 2-parter. So it feels like we haven't sat down and done like a normal recording in a while, and it feels really good to be back. Like, I love it.
Hi.
And I love you.
Hi. Yeah, I love you too. Smooth transition. So today we have an exciting episode with our newest bestie, Kira.
She's an absolute angel. And she's the host of a podcast called DNA Today, which is a show after our own heart, which makes Kira Dineen, the host, a kindred spirit. She started this podcast called DNA Today, a genetics podcast, in 2012, and it became a radio show in 2014. It started as a series of mini genetic lessons and bioethical debates, and it soon became something much more. The podcast has since produced over 150 episodes interviewing different experts in the field of genetics, and Kira herself is actually a genetic counselor, a certified genetic counselor. She has a master's of science in human genetics from Sarah Lawrence College in New York. She received her diagnostic genetics bachelor's of science from the University of Connecticut, and she's a certified cytogenetic technologist.
If you were wondering why Sydney had that section of the script, it's because I cannot read those words. I was like, dang, I'm so glad I didn't cytogenetic. I would have been like cryptology. I don't know what I would have said.
Cryptozoology. She's actually a cryptozoologist.
The first of her kind.
And she's listening to this episode like, absolutely not.
No, she's cool. I'm glad I didn't have an opportunity to ruin it. But I just did, so sorry.
No, you're fine. People love it when you mispronounce words. I don't know what it is, but literally everyone is like, it's my favorite.
I think it's because it's real. And if you've met me once, you're like, yeah.
Yeah, that's...
A bitch can't read.
That's Jessica. Okay. So the podcast DNA Today won Best 2020 Science and Medicine Podcast Award, which, that's me snapping. Snaps for Kira, snaps for DNA Today.
I can't snap. I don't even know what this sounds like in the mic. It's probably like,
You didn't eat your bread crust when you were a kid. Wait, that's whistling. Did your parents ever tell you that?
I can't do that either.
No. I hated bread crust when I was a kid, and I would always ask my parents to cut it off.
Oh my God, you were that kid.
Yeah, and they were like, if you eat your bread crust, it helps you whistle. Like, they straight up just lied to me.
Lied. Full-on lies.
I can't even whistle that well. Anyway. Oh, okay. So the show was also nominated 3 other years in the Podcast Awards. So congratulations to Kira and all of the staff of DNA Today. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, she's super
in addition,
cool.
She's hosted and produced 4 other podcasts, 2 of which are healthcare podcasts. One called Insight Says, a mental health podcast, which we think is amazing, and Advancing Dentistry, a dental podcast.
Mm-hmm.
She's literally our new best friend, and this is an amazing episode. She has all kinds of cool stuff to say about genetics, genetic counseling, and all of the things.
I thought you were going to say genetics again. I thought you were going to say she has all the things to say about genetics and genetics. That's what I thought you were going to say.
Genetics and also genetics. So Kira is going to give you some really cool information, and without further ado, welcome Kira.
Welcome to our closets.
Thank you so much for being here.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting just to be diving into all the genetics talk we're going to be talking about today. But I'm Kira Dineen. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a prenatal genetic counselor.
And a podcaster.
And a podcaster. That is true. Yes.
It's like you do a lot of stuff. Yeah.
And do I just like list
you
things?
You have a lot of hats.
Yeah. I've been podcasting for 10 years. So it's been interesting to see how the industry's changed over the years and everything. You don't have to explain it's an internet radio show. Now you just say it's a podcast and people accept that. So
everybody knows. Well, pretty much everybody knows.
And we'll get into a bit more about your history and like all the things that kind of make you, right? And why, right? This kind of intersected into our show and why we're excited to have you. But you do host your own podcast, which was actually awarded a Best 2020 Science and Medicine Podcast Award. So shout out to you and your listeners. And you appear like in a bunch of creative outlets, which we love. And we're definitely going to ask some questions about that as well. But first, that genetic counselor piece for high-risk patients. Can you tell us a bit about the why behind you doing that, and then also what it is?
Yes. Let's start with that. What is genetic counseling? Because that's not a household name yet, I don't think. So genetic counselors help people, patients, family members understand their genetics so they can make informed healthcare decisions. So this can really be in so many different areas of healthcare. Mm-hmm. So a lot of genetic counselors work in cancer, pediatric, prenatal are like the top hitters. But really any area of healthcare, genetic counselors are involved or shortly will be involved. So as a prenatal genetic counselor, I'm meeting with people that are pregnant and talking about genetics of their pregnancy, looking to see if they want to do testing, going through family history. That's a really important piece for any genetic counseling. And talking about ultrasound results too, just going over ultrasound findings, their pregnancy history. So going over all that information, and then as people decide to do testing, if that's something they decide to do, then going through those results. What does that mean? What does that mean for them and their partner and their family, but also more extended family members too, in case there's implications there. So that's kind of the, snapshot of what I do as a prenatal genetic counselor.
Cool.
And why did you choose that?
So I got into genetic counseling because I thought genetics was just so fascinating. Ever since high school, I was like, that was always the unit I was most excited for. And what I love about it is that there's so little that we know about genetics. So the possibilities are just endless with how much I expect to learn in my career. I'm, relatively young, so I've only been in this field for, so many years, but it's really exciting to just see how fast things change and things that I've learned are now outdated. And, some people that might be frustrating. That's, I just learned this. Now I got to learn something new. But I think that's a very exciting aspect in just that what we used to be able to do for patients is so different than what it is today, and just exciting to see how many treatments are being created and developed. So I think that there's just so much promise in genetics, and we're learning that genetics really is the basis of so many issues in healthcare. So a lot of things come back to that genetic point. So I think that that's, going back to like how genetic counselors can work in every area of healthcare. It's even outside of that. I've known genetic counselors working for the government, doing research, working for, commercial companies, consulting. So it's really cool to be able to have, a career that is such a variety of different paths to take. And just the impact you have with people, either, on this scale of talking to many people through podcasting, or just sitting one-on-one with patients and going through their information and helping them understand all this genetic information, because it kind of is like another language,
Yeah.
We get some information in high school, hopefully college, but a lot of it is not, explained, or whatever they learned is now, outdated. So I think kind of all those aspects led me to genetic counseling career.
That's so cool. I know that you mentioned you typically work with preconception and prenatal patients, but who typically needs genetic counseling? Like, what other avenues are there?
If someone has family history of cancer, that could be a reason to see a genetic counselor. So some signs of like hereditary cancer, so that inherited form, would be if people are under 50 when they're diagnosed with cancer, if it's same or similar cancers in the family, that's in the same branch of the family affecting multiple generations. And if one person has had 2 cancers or more cancers, so those might be reasons that someone goes to see a cancer genetic counselor.
Okay.
And those are just some of the, the signs. And what they may find is after doing genetic testing, if that's something that that person decides to do, is that they have inherited a genetic mutation or like a spelling change that has elevated their risk for cancer. And at that point, there may be areas where we can prevent cancer. So some people are familiar with the BRCA genes. Angelina Jolie made them, quite famous about 5-6 years ago. And, from that, of a lot of people learning about this and deciding to do similar measures as Angelina Jolie, like getting a prophylactic bilateral mastectomy of removing breast tissue before cancer happens. So that would be one example kind of in the cancer realm. In the pediatric realm, if a child is not meeting milestones, they're, not holding their head up on time, crawling, verbal cues, a lot of different issues that can come up there of meeting with a genetic counselor and understanding that disorder more if there is a disorder. I could go on and on about all the different areas. There's just so many of them.
So when a patient comes to you, typically, how does the consultation work? Like, how does it start? Can you kind of walk us through the basics of that kind of interaction?
Yeah, definitely. So when I sit down, usually I'm sitting down with a person that's pregnant. And I start out by going over their pregnancy history, if they have any, if it's not their first pregnancy, going through any complications they had during the pregnancy, any complications through the delivery. We talk about any exposures they may have had during pregnancy, any alcohol, drugs, x-rays, cigarettes, fever, and then going through that family history. So including cancer. I'm not a cancer genetic counselor, but they're sitting in front of me. They may not meet a cancer genetic counselor. This is my opportunity to check in, outside of prenatal and just doing family history. So we go through all that. And then I go through genetic testing options. So some of that is, one of the most popular tests is non-invasive prenatal screening. So NIPS for short. And this test is really looking at the DNA of the placenta that's just naturally coming off the pregnant person. So by taking a blood draw, we can actually look at that DNA coming off the placenta. And with this, we can screen for certain disorders like Down syndrome. So that's, a major test that we're looking at offering. And then another one is called carrier screening. And this is where we're looking at if a person is a carrier of a condition, where they could pass down that condition if their partner is a carrier of the same condition. So this is a condition like cystic fibrosis, sickle cell, where both parents need to be a carrier of the condition. So that's when we start getting their partner more involved as well in terms of testing that they may be tested at that point, or sperm donor, whoever is involved in the pregnancy. So those are like the 2 main tests that we go over in terms of like options there. And then obviously going over those results with patients, after I get results.
Yeah.
So interesting. So when you meet a patient for the first time and you're like, what brings you here today? What do they say?
So usually they're coming from the ultrasound. So usually they, are aware of the pregnancy. And usually they're between like 10, 13 weeks. So the end of the first trimester. And so I kind of just go over with them, like, this is the information we're going to cover during the session. Like, do you have any questions before we start? Sometimes they're like, oh, this is my 4th pregnancy. I just want to do all of what I've done before. And I'm like, okay, great. Let's figure out what that was. Make sure you want to do that again. Yeah. And when it's people's first pregnancies, to me, it's a little more obvious because they're asking a lot more questions. So, there's just so much to go over. And sometimes it's genetic related, sometimes it's not. I'm like, let's ask the nurse practitioner because that's not my area. I'm certainly learning a lot about pregnancy, outside of the genetic realm as well. But patients are usually somewhat familiar. They've been, they've been told that they'll meet with a genetic counselor. And sometimes they're like, well, why is that? Is something wrong? And not necessarily. Every practice and hospital is different. I meet with all the patients at our practice that are pregnant. So just kind of part of our standard of care. But that definitely differs depending on where you are, in the world, in the US. Definitely just like changes between places.
That's so interesting.
Well, I'm just curious. So when you're answering their questions, right? What is the like most common question, and then what's the craziest question somebody ever asked you?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think the most common question is, what's the blood test that can tell me the sex of the baby? So that's the most common. I have a blog post coming out about that soon, just covering, really that and beyond of all the questions I get about that testing. And like kind of a follow up to that is how accurate is it? It's looking at sex chromosomes. So, and I have the conversation with them between sex and gender and kind of educating patients.
Right. I was about to ask that.
Yeah, because they'll say, oh, gender of the baby. And I always just kind of say sex of the baby. Like that's, obviously the science
And then
terms.
you start fighting.
And then you ask them
then I'm like, okay.
And then you ask them to stop doing stupid gender reveals. No one wants to go to that.
So I do warn a little bit, and I kind of get a sense because patients are either on one side or the other, where they say like, oh yeah, like, I don't care, just call me, tell me what it is, like whatever. Or they're like, oh, we're not finding out until the birth, which is less common nowadays. I think kind of exciting. And then you have...
that'll be me.
Yeah, probably me too, eventually.
Just love spoilers. There's no way.
I do not want to know, because I will not allow people to buy gender specific items for a child.
Maybe you could find out and not tell anybody else. You also could play it that way.
No, if we find out, my wife will.
Yeah, she's just gonna go for it.
There's no way. Yeah, no.
So it will have to be a surprise. Yeah. But yeah, I'm certainly kind of, people say, oh yeah, we're doing a gender reveal, which, I mean, we can get into the title of that, but, I say, well, just, I kind of make a joke that just don't set any fires. Don't, just do something simple, please.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear about this on the news. Obviously it is a problem. But for the most part, people are doing like balloons or something. But yeah, that's definitely a common question. And the craziest question, I mean, I'm trying to think of like something that's like totally out of the box. I mean, sometimes I'll get questions where I'm like, were you listening? Like that doesn't quite line up maybe. Or, I'm just like, oh, this question makes me think like I got to backpedal a lot and review a lot of like basic genetics before jumping into things.
Right.
But a lot of, during family history, people will bring up like, oh, is this genetic? That's a common question. Like, is this thing that my dad have genetic? And I mean, that's such a complicated question. For certain things I can give an answer to. But most of the time it's like genetics plays a role, environment plays a role. We don't really know. I wish I had a better answer for that. I'm going to have to think about that and get back to you for like the craziest question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Going through like all of these like fertility appointments, right? I think I try to ask all the questions, and now I wonder, oh my, am I asking them a stupid question? Now I'm like,
am I the crazy patient?
Am I the crazy?
Oh, I doubt it. It's more like I spend 10 minutes going over something, and they're like, what is that? And I'm like, all right, let's go back to basics,
Sure.
But for the most part, I found patients are pretty engaged, and a lot of people are excited to be there, excited about a pregnancy, and really cute when they can bring their partners in and everything, and like have those conversations together.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Has that shifted with COVID? Has the excitement kind of gone away if they're coming in alone or virtual? That's not even on our list of questions, but I was just
that's
curious.
A good question. I mean, I have seen a bit of a shift. I think especially when COVID started, because we were really in the unknown before we had vaccines.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially before that was okayed for pregnant people to have vaccines, like while they're pregnant. So I think at that point, there was more hesitation, and, I'm meeting people very early in pregnancy. So, the projection of, okay, what is it going to look like when I'm delivering was such an unknown, especially last summer. And a little bit now too with Delta, so with the variant. So I think that's part of it. And at one point the hospitals around me, I'm practicing outside of New York City, and they were not allowing partners to be there during deliveries, and I cannot imagine that.
That's so hard.
It's like if people have partners, other family members, friends, it's like they're part of that pregnancy journey and part of that parenthood. I can't imagine just being in there alone and going through that and laboring, and sometimes complications are coming up with that too. So really feel for patients, and I'm glad to see that that's gotten better, but still a concern, definitely.
Very isolating, I would imagine. So I want to switch the focus a little bit to talk about the increase in the popularity of like direct to consumer DNA testing services like 23andMe, Ancestry does theirs, which your podcast actually has a whole series on that is super interesting. But in a nutshell, can you kind of tell us how that's affected your field?
Yeah, big impact. That's the spoiler alert there. On DNA Today, we did a 7-part series on direct consumer genetic test. And I mean, it's interesting because there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. I think, in terms of the impact on our field, I have patients all the time, especially when I ask about what countries their ancestors are from as part of the family history portion of the session. Then they start bringing up, oh, well, let me show you my 23andMe results. So that's something that happens a lot. And it's definitely interesting. If we have time, that's cool to, get into. But part of it is that people don't understand the limits of the testing. I think that's my biggest gripe with it.
Yeah.
That if people understand, okay, the testing is only able to do A, B, and C, it can't do X, Y, and Z, then I would feel much better about it. So I think it's more the education piece that sometimes I struggle with. Going back to, I mentioned the BRCA genes, if you have a mutation in one of those, that there's an increased risk for cancer, of developing cancer in your lifetime. And so, 23andMe is a company that will look at mutations in BRCA, but it only looks at 3 mutations. So if you have one of those 3 mutations, that's probably going to be brought up.
Yeah.
But if you have a mutation elsewhere in the gene, not one of those 3 hotspots, you're maybe going to misunderstand that and say, oh, I don't have any mutation.
Right.
And then on the flip side, people that are doing the testing saying, hey, I'm doing this for fun. Let's see what countries I'm from. Oh, we'll check off, that I'm doing like the health related information. They find out they have a mutation that brings them into a doctor. They never would have done testing otherwise. That's amazing that we were able to find that.
Yeah.
And that person may have never had genetic testing, may have developed cancers, didn't know. So I think it's really sticky gray area. But if people understand the limitations of the testing, I think it's great.
So how accurate percentage-wise would you say that the country of origin is? Because I did one and I did not think that was very accurate according to
didn't match up the family stories.
Not match to what my dad has in our history.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it can be very specific for people that are of European descent. So taking myself as an example, I grew up being told one of my grandparents, his parents were from Ireland, East Cork, Ireland. I'm like, okay, most of my cousins have gone out, visited over there. And, I go to do the test. I don't tell anybody about it because I'm like, well, what if I find out something that doesn't match up all the family stories?
Yeah.
And I did. So it came back East Cork, Ireland. And I didn't tell 23andMe that, they figured that out. So it can be very specific for people from European countries, but it's not as specific for people from non-European countries. And that's another area of issue that's not just with direct consumers, but really genetic testing in general. We don't have as much data for people from other countries. And then we're not able to get as specific. And, I think that this is a major problem in genetics and it's slowly being addressed. I wish that was happening sooner. But that's with direct consumers and also medical grade testing.
So that was a perfect segue right into our next topic. So great job. Shout out to you.
Can you tell I'm a podcaster?
Yeah.
We usually don't have good transitions, so that was awesome.
No, we just change lanes quickly.
We just are like smooth transition and then we'll transition.
Yeah.
Why is that the genetic databases are not more
diverse,
fairly
like inclusive?
Composed?
Yeah, I think one of the issues is just, when we look at the history of genetics, spanning out not just genetic counseling, but genetics in general, there's a lot of issues in our history. You guys have highlighted some on the show. You've talked about Henrietta Lacks, other genetic topics, and gone into that. And, a lot of the genomes that we started with, especially like, the first 10, first 100, those are all white people. When you look at it, a lot of people specifically from Utah, because the study started there. And, I don't know all the details with that, but yeah, specifically Utah. Over time, we've gotten better than in the past. We're not where we should be. And I think the other part of that is just the mistrust with the medical community, which is completely understandable. Yeah. Another topic you guys have dived into a lot on this show. And that, I think as healthcare providers, we need to do a better job at educating the public about this and having patients be a partner in research as opposed to just giving a sample. Yeah. So I think that is a big part of it. There are a lot of studies that are starting to do this more, where, participants are treated more like partners than just like, oh, you were a donor of this blood sample. So I think, there's a lot that we need to be doing on our end as healthcare providers in order to have this be more diverse databases, because, giving a real world example, as a prenatal genetic counselor, when I do carrier screening that we talked about before, looking if someone's, say, a cystic fibrosis carrier, different conditions like that, the autosomal recessive conditions. If I have someone that is European descent, I do the testing, they, don't come back as a carrier, there's still a % chance that the test missed that they're a carrier, because it's screening, so it's not perfect. Yeah. That chance is going to be much less than someone that's from a non-European country, because we don't have as much data. So when we're looking at people's genes and trying to understand, okay, this spelling difference, is this human diversity and just, part of just how we are all different? Or is this change leading the gene not to work and going to cause an issue if that's passed down? So understanding the spelling differences and what that means for a gene to work or not is not as good for people of non-European descent, because we don't have as much data to understand all those spelling changes. So, this has gotten drastically better. It used to be much more of an issue, but it still is an issue. So that's something that that's something as a genetic counselor I'm asking labs about. Like, okay, well, what's your data about people from these countries? And like, my patient has ancestors from these countries. So like, what are the numbers you can give me with that? And how is your laboratory helping to solve this problem so that I don't have that discrepancy between patients where, that's a huge, huge difference sometimes. We're talking about small numbers here, but to me, that's a difference if I'm not able to give the same level of care to patients.
Sure, yeah.
Can you, as a patient, could you request like a more diverse genetic lab? Could you do that? Be like, I don't want this to go to a trash lab.
I suppose so. Okay. Yeah. I think that could be a question. If you're a patient and you're thinking about this and saying, well, what genetic testing did I have? You could ask your healthcare provider and say like, okay, and it should be in your lab report of, we're talking about carrier screening. If you've had it before, it should have your residual risk, which is the fancy name for what's the chance that you're a carrier and the test missed that. So that's specific to your ethnicity. So that information should be there. And you could say, is there a way you could get me a number for someone of a different ethnicity so I could compare that just for my own knowledge? I haven't had a patient ask for that yet. Just I feel like if you were my patient, maybe you would be asking me that.
I will ask my doctor because I'm crazy. Yeah. They'll be like, what?
And then they'll be on a podcast and they'll be like, that's the craziest question. Yeah.
Right. That's the craziest question somebody asked.
Yes. Full circle. Jess, I don't know if you're comfortable sharing. Have you done carrier screening before? Is that familiar to you?
So, in the process right now of doing some fertility kind of testing, my wife and I, so we have been through a bunch of testing.
So much testing.
Yeah. Which is fun, good times, but also very expensive. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other part is looking, I don't know if you're using a sperm donor or someone that but looking to see that they're not a carrier for the same conditions that you and your partner might come up as, which I'm sure they'll cover if they haven't already.
They have,
with you and your partner and everything. Yeah.
It sounds like a very stressful process. From my side of things, I'm very nervous just for Jess, for me, for everyone. Have you had to learn any hard lessons sitting on the provider side of the sort of healthcare and counseling side of the table?
Yeah, I think one of them is really just how common it is to have a miscarriage. I think that's something that, I heard statistics before being a healthcare provider, but actually sitting with patients and just seeing how common it is, it makes me think of, just people that have been through this thinking like, oh my gosh, like I didn't expect this to come up for me. Like this is so rare. And it really isn't. It's like 1 in 4 people experience a miscarriage, 1 in 4 females. So,
wow.
that is very common. And a lot of patients that I meet with, for their first pregnancies, maybe they haven't, had that. Maybe they haven't been trying before. I would say probably over half of the patients that I see have had a miscarriage before.
Wow.
So my data is a little bit skewed because I have high risk patients in there as well.
Right.
But I think that that's one that, is not something that's talked about as much. Definitely more so in recent years. But just that is, can be hard for people to go through. But possibly a silver lining is just knowing that a lot of other people experience this at some point.
Yeah. Do you think it's less talked about because of like the taboo and the kind of I mean it's a really painful topic obviously for so many people, but it's difficult to have a conversation around it because it's such a difficult topic. But on top of that, is there any other reason that you think people are not really talking about that as much?
I think one that it's just so personal.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
and maybe someone wants to talk about it, but their partner doesn't. And that's really something that's between them. And,
Yeah.
I think also with work culture of deciding, when you're pregnant, when am I telling work about this? If you have a full-time job, if you have a part-time job, situation like that. And most miscarriages happen in the first trimester when people are usually not informing work. So I think at that point, because it's not public information, then that doesn't come up with people.
Mhm.
Different story if it's after they've told people. And that's something that patients bring up to me. They're like, well, when should I start telling people that I'm pregnant? And that's such a personal decision. I can give them medical information on like risks of a miscarriage at that point, if that's
Yeah.
something that they're concerned about. Or, just say some patients wait until they get this result back. Some patients wait until this ultrasound. Some people with COVID, we were saying earlier, just don't say anything until they're 8 months. And they're like, hey, I'm having a baby in a couple weeks.
Right.
Surprise.
Yeah. So,
See you later.
that can be, really different. And I think the stigma about it is lifting slowly. So I think that that's a good aspect that we don't have as much of a stigma anymore as people realize how common it is.
Yeah.
We think about it, the human body's not as great at reproducing as I think a lot of people think. A lot of people have probably had a miscarriage, not even known they were pregnant because it happened so early. So, that's also an aspect that I don't have statistics on that, but just knowing how the body works and everything that, maybe you miss one period and you're like, oh, okay, not sure what's going on with that. And then you get it back and you didn't know you're pregnant. So yeah, definitely a lot to explore with miscarriages, but just know if you listening to this, you've had a miscarriage, one of your partners has, or, good friends, family, like know that it's unfortunately very common.
Yeah.
Could you give our listeners any advice if they know somebody who's been through a miscarriage or struggling with a miscarriage? Like how would you advise them to or not to talk about it? Or, of course it'll probably depend on their friend or their loved one, but if you have any advice in that regard.
Good question.
Yeah, I think if you're someone that wants to reach out to other people, there are so many different communities to connect with. It can be a hit or a miss, like on Facebook communities. So definitely take that with a grain of salt. But there also are some, I know you talked about, on a previous show about the ICU, that there are some communities like through hospitals too.
Mhm.
So, if your local hospital, inquire about that. Your OBGYN may know about specific groups in your area. So I think that's good, to think about. And just, I think it's good to talk to people that you're close to and that you trust because that, it's really tough thing to go through. On a medical side, I would say if you've had recurrent pregnancy loss, so 2 or more pregnancy losses, that's when I think you should check in with a healthcare provider as well, just to see if there's any testing to do to figure out maybe is there a biological reason behind that we can identify. So I would certainly recommend doing that. At that point, you could also meet with a genetic counselor. So sometimes I have patients that, have that history, and we're meeting to see, can I find any reason genetically that this is happening, and providing them more information at that point.
And you actually, on your podcast, you have this is something for our listeners. Kira has a whole series that she's doing about different infertility issues. And in that space, could you tell us, what are the most interesting things that you learned kind of doing that series about infertility?
Yeah, that's another 7-episode series. So there's a lot of information there. I had a genetic counselor come on that actually specializes in fertility, since I don't, I meet with people once they're pregnant, but not as much on that fertility end. It's really interesting just to see, and Jess can probably speak to this better than I can, honestly, but just so much testing that you can do to, figure out if you're having any issues, or if, you're not in a heterosexual relationship and you're doing things in what people say, a different way. I mean, that's going to be my future. But, so I think just knowing that there's a lot of different testing, and often it's for you and your partner. So it's not necessarily for just the person that's looking to become pregnant. So I think that's just good to be aware of just all the different testing, and that things are changing so fast. Fertility is one of the areas that changes the fastest that, I'm exposed to in genetics and everything. So just a lot of new testing and different ways that we can test embryos too. So if you know of a certain genetic condition in your family, you have the option of doing what's called IVF and potentially choosing an embryo that didn't inherit a certain condition. So there's just, so many options, and I think that's something else that should be talked about more, that it's, not necessarily just like a natural conception, but there's so many different ways to become a parent.
So cool.
Yeah. It's so funny. We going through all this, right? We have to fight with our insurance because they're like, you're not infertile. And I'm like,
right. You're like, well, we've tried for over 12 months. Nothing happens. So.
Yeah, nothing's
you
happening.
Check off that box.
So our doctor has to write us a letter. And even then, there's 20% of companies provide any fertility, anything with their health insurance, if they provide it at all. It's just absolute trash. But it's so awkward to be
this is why,
I don't know what to tell you, insurance people. I cannot become pregnant on my own.
Also, I can't be the only one.
And that's something that I hope changes. Right. Yeah. How many people are with someone of the same sex? So I think that that's something that I would like to see change, where it's we would just check off a box saying, okay, this is the situation, and this is where insurance, would kick in a little bit. Because there's different ways of defining infertility. And so, that could be a type of
it's
infertility.
So annoying. When you get there, give me a call.
It is very annoying.
We'll talk shit.
I will.
Because it is so annoying. I'm like, y'all are absolute trash.
You get pricked and prodded, all kinds of needles. Yeah.
Also, it's how are you still being penalized for being in a same-sex relationship in this day and age?
Grow up.
Insurance companies.
It's not like you're choosing to do things, more difficult for yourself. You're just looking to get to the end goal.
Though that is on brand for me, but that is not what I'm doing here.
On brand, but doesn't apply.
Okay, let's talk about your podcast for a second, which obviously shameless plug. We're into that. Why do you do this work, this podcasting work, and what motivates you to do that?
So I've always found podcasting to be interesting. I've been doing it 10 years and I haven't gotten sick of it yet. So I guess I'm in it for the long haul. But I think it's such a unique platform because you get to connect with people very on a personal level, but you're reaching so many people. And I think it's just a great way that as people are doing chores, driving, walking, they're able to tune in and just hear someone's voice and, hear this conversation and learn so much from it. So I think that that's just, it drew me into podcasting to begin with, and just seeing the amount of people you can impact with it. So, that's something that obviously you guys are passionate on, preaching to the choir here, but, I think that it's such a great way to connect with people. And I do other things. I do monthly webinars that are broadcasted, and, I have a genetic counseling column based out of the UK. And so, I think it's just cool to be able to explore all different ways of really science communications, I guess all of this is under. And, just seeing the impact and that, things that maybe like common sense to some people are not for others. And so just closing that gap so that people can just have free genetic content available to them so they can understand all of this. Just something that I've always been really passionate about, and kind of why I went for genetic counseling, because I was podcasting and everything. And I was like, okay, well, how am I going to, make this into a bigger career?
Yeah, that's amazing. What has been the best, or I won't say the best, what's been your favorite interview that has been on your podcast so far? Like, if our listeners wanted to start with an episode on your show, which one would you recommend they start with?
Well, I can't say favorite interview because I have over 150 episodes, so I can't pick a favorite, but I'll give a recommendation. So our 150th episode, I had so much fun on. So the episode features 2 scientists that were involved with the sequencing of one of the first genomes in the world. And they have this really cool story of how it came to be. And really one of the scientists, who's not a geneticist by training, heard people were starting to do, people were starting to have their genome sequenced. Like there was a few people in the world at this point. So, the government was working on this and everything. For the Human Genome Project. And he was like, well, let me get a little team together, see if I can do it. So he sequences his own genome, and he's having a meeting with a cardiologist he works with and says, hey, I have a question for you just about this, gene. I had a question about this one variant here. And he's like, wait, you're bringing up your genome to me? Like, you're the 10th person in the world that's even had their genome sequenced, and you're just like casually bringing it up to me.
Yeah.
So they just share their story and, go through just how they got to that point and just how it was so groundbreaking at the time. And just looking back on how genetic testing has changed in the years since. I think it was kind of about 10 years ago, or maybe a little longer than that. You and Ashley, one of the scientists that I'm talking about, has a book that really goes through this whole journey called The Genome Odyssey. So we kind of talk about that as well in the show and everything. So I would say that's a good episode to tune into, just because they're rock stars in the field, and they were really awesome to have on, and they know each other really well. So it was a really good dynamic and everything. So that's episode 150 of DNA Today.
Very cool. And can I ask a question? Can I ask a very nerdy science question?
Oh, of course.
Perfect.
Who are you talking to? Go for it.
Have you heard of the Human Epigenome Project?
So I've heard of it, but I can't speak to it.
Okay.
But, looking at how the genes are turned on and off is going to give us so much information than just what the genetic code is. Like, we figured that out, pretty much the whole genome. But figuring out how genes are turned on and off, that's like the next phase of genomics, I feel like.
Yeah, we need to do an epigenetics episode.
Yeah, I've had a couple of them on the show.
I'm adding that to the list.
Yeah, that's a really cool one.
Very cool.
And there's a lot of interesting disorders that are based in epigenomics, and just that there's an epigenetic change 100%. And everything. So, yeah. Okay,
last question. You've been super generous with your time, and thank you so much for being here. And we've been asking this of all of our guests. How do you take your coffee?
How do I take my coffee? That's the most important question so far. So
for us too.
So I don't know. I'm cheap. So I make my coffee at home, and I just put a little bit of caramel syrup in it, and I feel like that's a perfect cup of coffee. So
that sounds fancy.
I guess so.
A gallon of caramel syrup.
I put just a little bit.
An aggressive amount.
You're more on the latte side then.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I'm more on like the espresso, like most caffeinated possible side.
Yeah, that's
gotcha. Yeah, if I have too much caffeine, it's crazy. And I did a genetic test, actually, one of the at-home kits, and it was like, you're very sensitive to caffeine. I'm like, yep.
I know.
It's like 8 ounces for me, no more.
Yeah. Jess will work through like a venti in like 4 minutes.
That's how I know I need to stop.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I got to cut myself off noon. I can't have any caffeine after noon. I'm like,
I cannot relate to that. That's crazy.
Yeah, Jess has a full-on addiction.
We're opposites.
Like, are you okay?
You're like, how do you live your life? How are you caffeine free?
That's awesome. Well, good for you. I'm sure your heart is thanking you. My heart is like, please listen.
My heart is like, do you know what water is?
Yeah, you don't.
Never.
Know water.
Oh, thank you so much. This was fantastic. This was beyond cool. We learned so much from you, and we're so excited that you could be here.
No, thanks for having me. No, you guys have some really interesting episodes. It's cool that you have this whole angle. And I was just like, oh, like Henrietta Lacks, and I go through it like, damn, they've already covered that, because that is my favorite book. I mean, Rebecca Skloot is
such a good book.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of Henrietta Lacks' descendants have been on the show to kind of share their,
I didn't realize that. That's so cool.
Well, thank you so much. We will definitely link your podcast, your blog, all your things in our notes so that people can hit you up as well.
This was fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, best of luck with the show in season 3.
Yeah, back at you. Thank you so much.
All right, bye guys. Thanks for having me.